Hi, Dr. Thema. Welcome to this
Oh,
public program. Welcome everyone who's joined us tonight. Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this conversation. How are you
thank
tonight?
you. I am wonderful. I'm excited that we're cousins with the same last name and that we have our blue on for this healing conversation.
Well,
So I'm grateful and excited. We're South Carolina,
okay.
but it's still possible. We go back far enough. I am Dr. Thema Bryant, and I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. On my father's side, we are the Bryants, and my mom's side, the Williams. But if we go back far enough, thanks to our DNA testing, I come from the Mende people of Sierra Leone, and I am grateful for ancestors who paved the way for us to be here, both known and unknown, recognized and unrecognized. There is the African saying, I am because we are. And so knowing that it's because people before me sacrificed and labored and prayed and dreamed and reimagined that I'm able to be here. I live in Los Angeles, and I am the child and grandchild of griots, of ministers, of educators, of community leaders, of artists. And all of that runs in me and is alive in me. And I'm happy to say it continues on in my two children, who are Ife and Ayo, and those names mean love and joy.
Yes.
So I am feeling full in life and holding both ancestors and descendants at the same time. Reclaim Yourself is the workbook inspired by the book Homecoming. Homecoming came out in 2022. Yes, that's the book, Reclaim Yourself. And while I have several books before these, most of those books are more academic.
Uh-huh.
So they're textbooks, and as you're saying, like there's this kind of technical or scientific way that you write and kind of making your scientific argument and all of your citations because you can't say something unless someone said it first. So these kind of rules and restrictions. And I really was in a point in my life, both personally and professionally, of recognizing one, that knowledge is power, and two, wanting to give the information to people in a way that they can use it. So the point is not like, can I write this in a way that sounds smart, right? That it is, I want to land on the target, and the target is our heart, uh, and to land in such a way that when people read it, they understand it and they feel it and they can apply it, because it doesn't make sense for it to be feel good and then we remain as we are. Um, and so that, and I love you saying it being first a love letter to myself, because it's for people who have faced stress and trauma, and I have faced stress and trauma. So it's not just a hypothetical guess at what people might need to know, but it's based on both my lived experience, but also, these decades of working with people, helping people to reclaim themselves.
Mhm.
And all of that is rooted in love.
Mhm.
So I would say that is in it, and guiding it is a love for humanity and a hope for us to be able to get to the truth of ourselves, and not to remain disconnected. I don't have an agenda. As you said, like whose truth? It should be your own truth, right?
Mhm.
That's the piece with therapy, is it's not for the therapist to tell you what you should do, or to decide for you. It is to have us each confront the truth of our own souls,
Mhm.
and then we know what to do. And often, what I've discovered is we know what to do, but we're afraid, or we're lacking support, or we don't know the steps of how to get from where I am to where I want to be. And so one of the first steps in reclaiming yourself or coming home to yourself is to tell yourself the truth. And so sometimes it's not just that we lie to other people, we can lie to ourselves. What's the biggest lie probably that we say? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Right? We don't even think about it. And it's like, are you? That would be remarkable to be fine with everything that is happening. So for us, we cannot heal wounds we won't acknowledge. And so it's a beautiful thing to be able to tell ourselves the truth of um, our circumstance, because then we're in a place to say, okay, now what? That is the truth. And so now what? Home is authenticity. Home is being real. Home is true. And why did we leave home, or what made us disconnect from the truth of ourselves? Many different circumstances. One, we get the message very early on of what we need to do or say, or how we need to present ourselves to be liked, to be loved, to be chosen, to be thought highly of. And so those messages not only come from your family, it comes from your peer group, it comes from teachers, it comes from the mass media. And so we come to believe things about ourselves. But one of my dear sister friends, Asia, who's a poet, has a poem that says, "Who lied?" Right? Who told you you weren't good enough? Who told you there was a problem with your nose or with your hair? Who told you that your body was misshaped? Who told you that your voice was wrong? Who told you that the way you think about things is not acceptable? And so it starts so early. And I remember my daughter, who's now in college, when she was in preschool, she wanted to wear her hair out, and it was this big, cute, curly afro, and she had like these yellow bows. And when I picked her up at the end of the day, she was very upset because one of the boys had said her hair looked funny. She didn't wear her hair out like that. That was preschool. She didn't wear it out again until like 8th grade.
Wow.
Right? From one
Wow.
person, like one person said, this is unacceptable. And so, we think back, what are the various times that we were taught we were unacceptable, and the ways we changed ourselves in order to be either with this friendship group or romantically, or even in a job setting. And so those are kind of the everyday ways we can lose sight of ourselves. And then there are the larger ways, which are experiences of trauma. Right. So if we experience abandonment, physical abuse, verbal, sexual abuse, I would say the trauma of poverty and oppression, all of those, we ultimately, I won't say all, well, ultimately we want to be safe. And so we learn to adjust and modify ourselves in the hopes of being safer. Like if you have a dream of becoming something and you have never seen someone who looks like you in that place, that can also send a message. So it's not only what people have said to you, but it's also the invisibility, the erasure, the assumption of like, you don't belong here, right? So
Yes.
we call that, whether it's covert or overt, right? Subtle or blatant stereotype, stigma, discrimination, not only around race and ethnicity, but gender, sexuality, disability, migration status, religion. And so we can get boxed in and end up living in reaction to other people's assumptions, which is like a full-time job. And that's not free. So to reclaim myself is not to center what other people think of me, and I don't say that in a naive sense. I know we are affected by other people's opinions about us, but that I retain the right to define myself. People can spend their lives longing for the approval of certain
Mm,
people, right? Because you think like, if this person doesn't love me, no one will. Or this person must know me more than anyone else. Or if they say that I'm stupid, it must be true. If they say I'm ugly, it must be true. And so, proximity, family, also people with status or authority,
mhm.
their opinions can weigh heavy when we talk about like power dynamics. And so, even thinking about within ourselves, whose opinions is it easy for you to shake off, and who's like resonate like years later, you still hear what they said, or you still feel that, or part of you even believes it. We're relatively young, so I think it's like arrogant to say if someone hasn't done psychotherapy, they've done no work on themselves. And I'm an advocate of
Yes,
therapy. I provide therapy. I'm in therapy. And at the same time, there are many, many pathways of
yes,
healing. And in a lot of places in the world, therapy is not an option. So to assume that that means people are not whole is, it's just arrogant. So it was important for me to acknowledge the various contributions that exist, as you named, from around the world. Because often what happens is, scientists or scholars or mental health folks will gather information, say, extract it from a culture, and then say, like, I founded it, right? Like I'll say, like, I created this in 2024. Meanwhile, people have been doing this for generations.
yes.
So it's another way of, you say, of truth telling, and also so that our young people who are growing up with various identities don't believe that healing, wholeness, and wellness is something separate from who they are.
Mhm.
I love in the Chicano affirmative psychotherapy, their institute, they talk about, therapy. It is an indigenous healing form because it's relational. It's like you go and seek out the elders and
Yes.
talk about whatever your issues are, and they will support you through it. And so, it's the collective, it's that we're interrelated, it's showing up for each other instead of just this idea that this is just some totally foreign concept
Mhm.
to who we are. I am so grateful to have been raised by Afrocentric parents, and they gave this wisdom to my brother and I in multiple ways. A big part of it was exposure, but I'll start even with the names. And so my name Thema means queen, and my middle name Simone is after the African American singer Nina Simone, who's a fire starter and a justice bringer. And my brother Jamal's name means beautiful spirit. So I would say starting with the naming, but then also in our community, my father was a pastor, and really practiced what we would call liberation theology, which is in part one, that marginalized people, minoritized people are not an afterthought of God. Right. Some people try to say, like, oh, like not loved or not sacred or not chosen, or like, that God didn't have us in mind, versus, like so beloved, right?
Mhm.
We are so, so beloved. And, um, and that it's not just about afterlife, but like a liberation theology means our church was open all week long because we had like a feeding program and an AA degree program, and all of the different components of holistic wellness, of wanting us to be free on earth, not just afterlife.
Yes.
And so that taught me, and then we would always be a part of like Kwanzaa programming, and then I actually had the opportunity to live in Liberia, West Africa, for 2 years of high school, and that was life changing because I like to tell people this is like pre-Obama, where people would say you could be anything you want to be, but you didn't really see it.
Mhm.
And so to go to a place as a teenager at 14, to go somewhere and everyone in a place of authority, in a position of authority, looked like me, like the head of the bank, the head of the school, the president of the university, every newscaster. So it opened up, my imagination of what is possible. Before that, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. And so and often I will say, grew up with those stereotypes about Africa, where what gets presented. Even when I told people I was moving there, they were like, "What are you going to eat? Everyone is starving, or everyone is sick, or all of this negativity." And so to go there and see the beauty of it, the genius of it, the cultural richness, that allowed me when I started college to really have a greater sense of myself and a greater sense of like global issues beyond my block, right? And so, yeah, those pieces really, really taught me well. So there are different domains of self-esteem. So you can feel good about yourself maybe as a writer, but not feel good about yourself in terms of making friends. Or you can feel very confident in yourself in math, but not confident in sports. Okay, so there are different domains. And I was one of those kids growing up that like always got A's. So I had confidence about my ability to figure things out or to do whatever work was assigned. But growing up in Baltimore, there was definitely what we would call internalized racism that manifests as colorism. And so, even though I was at a predominantly Black public school, there was a lot of teasing around complexion, around my features. Like it was an insult to say you look like an African. This is because of that brainwashing that must be negative. So it was so powerful for me to, as a teen girl, to move to a place. I had the same face, the same features, and literally got off the plane and was praised. Like I had never experienced that before, right? That I went from ridicule to celebrated. And so that was so, we talk about homecoming, that was so healing for me to see beyond the narrow Eurocentric beauty myths, to be able to see, not only the beauty in myself, but the beauty in all people. I remember when I started practicing, I had a Chinese American client who was dealing with colorism as well. Because at first I just thought it was something in the Black community, but of course learned that it's global. And, her struggling to see the beauty in herself. And I was so glad I did that inner work, because in one session, she asked me, "Well, Dr. Bryant, do you think you're beautiful?" And it was so important that as we've said, that I could tell my truth, that yes, I do. And I know it wasn't easy. Like you're having to push past all of these messages that are trying to convince you of a lie so that you can see the glory that you are, right? And as you said, that's an ongoing, you have to perpetually do that, because in a consistent way, you're getting these other messages. We think about colonization, right? What does colonization do? It separates, it extracts, it attempts to dehumanize, it creates hierarchy, it oppresses, it steals. And so then to decolonize is considered a reclamation, right? Being able to reclaim truth, reclaiming land, reclaiming rights, reclaiming indigenous ways, reclaiming yourself, right? And so then to decolonize sacred spaces, we would have to think about what are the ways in which they've been colonized, right? So one of them can be as simple as when we think about music, right? And I love all forms of music, but when we let kind of a racial hierarchy exist in that sacred space, then people would say more classical music is more sacred or sounds holier than like drums and guitars, right? So it's like who says, who says that in sacred space that we must always be silent, you know, and, you know, in our tradition in Black churches, they have like a lot of call and response. And so, you know, if the minister says something, to be able to say amen, or something they've taken out of a lot of churches is they used to have a testimony service where
Mhm.
people would get up and talk about the difficulties and challenges that they've overcome with God's help. And so, interestingly, in liberation theology, which was coined by a Latin American psychologist, one of the healing formats is called testimonios. So it's telling our story. And we think
Mhm.
about us often in sacred spaces or religious spaces in the present being so afraid of being judged and condemned that we censor our story, that we lie, that we dilute ourselves, that we pretend to be perfect, that we pretend to have never had a past or, you know, never taken some detours. And so to decolonize our faith, our ministry, our theology, is to worship in a way that connects with us culturally, to not
Mhm.
feel like I have to adopt a different culture to be close to God. It is to be able to be unashamed, you know, to be present. And also, I would say, to be able to see the divine, however you visualize that, to be able to see the divine in your image, right? So in sacred text, it says, you know, that we're made in the image and likeness of God. So, can you picture God in yourself?
Mhm.
It was so funny growing up at a Black church in Baltimore. We had this huge mural on the wall, and one of my friends from school who was white spent the night at my house. And so on a Saturday night, so on Sunday, we got up and went to church. And we walked in, and there's like the huge mural with the Black Jesus. And she said, "Who's that?" And I had been so in this Afrocentric space. I'm like, "You don't know who Jesus is?" Like, you've never seen Jesus. So it's so funny how disturbed some people get. I was doing a presentation at a seminary. I won't say which one, but I was showing God as Asian, as a woman, as Black, and people get very flustered, you know, if it is anything but a white man. And, you know, with the like decolonize, like, you know, that the sacred can only be in your image and likeness, right? That
Mhm.
you can't even imagine that any other embodiment could be sacred. So, yeah, to recognize the range of experiences people have had with sacred spaces.
Yes.
And often we can only imagine that people have had our experience, which, you know, is just a slice of the pie. So there are people for whom it has really saved their lives, you
Mhm.
know, both the, you know, I would say the belief or faith, I would say for trauma survivors, sometimes we'll say things like, even though I didn't get justice on earth, I know ultimately this person is going to have to answer for what they did to me. And that gives them some sense of relief. For other people, that sense of support. For some people, it's a protective factor against engaging in unhealthy behaviors because they
Mhm.
feel that would like dishonor their sacred commitments. Um, and so for some people, it's love, it's hope, it's community, it's like all of these great things. And they can't imagine why people would not want it, right? And then there are people who have experienced what we call either religious abuse or church hurt, who have been condemned, violated, controlled. We talk about like places that are more cultish, um, taking their money, sexual abuse, all of these things, or even if it wasn't like a physical or sexual or financial abuse, were put in such a place of shame and condemnation where they're like, this is terrible. And I want to help everybody to reject it. You know, so these are very different experiences,
Mhm.
and we have to learn how to hear each other um, and to make room to hold in our heart the spaciousness or the truth, which is both of those things can be true at the same time, you
Mhm.
know? And so for some people, this is what helps them to not only get through, but maybe even to thrive. And then for other people, they're like, it was so harmful, I had to get out of there. And that's why we say the range of sacred experiences. So some people will say, like, I will find the sacred in the arts or in nature or in these other spiritual communities. I will say, whenever you have a group of people, you're going to have issues, right? Because some people will say, I'm leaving formal religion, and then they got into a yoga group, and then there was abuse in the yoga group. So that is one of the challenges of humanity, right? Is sometimes, well, all the time, people don't live up to the fullness of the ideals or the values. But you want to be in a community where at least that people are striving, where there's accountability, where especially those in leadership are being intentional about trying to protect the space. There's a chapter on breakups and divorce.
Oh, yeah.
And that's an important one in terms of our healing. Interestingly, as you named with me being a minister, I have not only provided premarital counseling, but officiated weddings. And so, a part of weddings, a part of the formal vow, the traditional vows, it says, I vow to or I promise to be faithful in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer. And so what I invite us to do, because so many people idealize that and are waiting for that promise from another, and for us to start with vows to ourselves, right? Do I vow to love myself with my imperfections? Do I vow to love myself when I am chosen and when I am rejected? Do I vow to love myself when I am winning and when it feels like I have failed? And even in terms of our aging, do I still choose me? Right. And so I would invite people, whether in the chat or on your phone or on a sheet of paper, to write some vows to yourself. What do you promise? Do you promise to choose yourself even when what happens, right? Across seasons, across times, across finances. Sometimes we're so pleased with ourselves when our money is right. And when the money's not right, we're mad at ourselves or beating ourselves up. When we have it all together, we can feel easier to love. And what happens when it's not just what everybody else did? Maybe I dropped the ball. Maybe I self-sabotage. Maybe I went back to an old habit, an old pattern. And so, how will I treat myself? How will I delight in myself? How will I love myself? So, and it's also a way of helping people to recenter themselves, because often after a breakup, there's a lot of outward focus, either focused on that other person or focused on who is going to replace that other person. And we haven't sat with the truth of us, right? Because once I sit with and heal myself, then things will shift going forward, right? Like when I really loved me, I choose differently. I have different boundaries. I have different requirements, and I show up differently. Yes. And so, yes, write some vows to yourself. And then as you're thinking about those vows, I will take us through a little embodiment. So it is a lot of stress we hold in our bodies. And I invite you to even think about, where do you hold your stress? Mine is often like here and in my lower back. Some of us it's in the jaw. Some people keep the kind of like wrinkled forehead. Some people, the shoulders are up in the belly, And so we think about when I reclaim myself, that I invite ease into my body. And so I will take us through some breath, and I want you to know all of this is invitational. So that means it's not mandatory. I'm a trauma survivor, and a part of healing trauma is getting to have body sovereignty, to get to choose, right? So just because someone says take a breath, you don't have to. You decide if you want to. So you're invited to, and you can decide for yourself. So one self-compassion hold, we call it, is one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. And you could just inhale in through the nose and exhale out through the mouth. And the hand that's on the belly, you can lift up to your forehead, inhaling in through the nose, exhaling out through the mouth. And the last one, you can embrace yourself, hug yourself, inhaling in through the nose, exhaling out through your mouth. And if it aligns with you, you can just say out loud, I choose me.
I choose me.
Because I think, like, if we write in the abstract, it's like, self-esteem is this,
Right.
depression is this. But to see it in action, one, it helps people to see themselves, because they can either often relate themselves or they know someone it reminds them of. And so it helps them to understand or have more compassion
Oh,
for
yes.
how that person may be feeling. Um, I will say, one of the things that's been striking to me is someone who said, wow, you didn't waste any time. Like, you put us to work right away.
It's true.
So
Right.
it's one of those where sometimes you may think you're asking a light question, but it forces us to think. I think one of the first questions I ask is, what is it you want to reclaim? What drew you to the title? And sometimes that is not even in our awareness. We just say, oh, that sounds interesting. But it's like there's a reason. Maybe you notice something or you feel something might be missing, even a part of yourself. So it is, I'll say, the growing pains of self exploration, but then also people's enthusiasm for doing the work. And what people have said to me is what you said, which is it's not to be done quickly, right? You don't want to
Yeah.
just like grab a pen and like, I'm going to finish this book tonight. Like you have to, like sit with it. And if you have people in your life you trust, talk to them about it. To deepen it, figure out how you might apply it. Like I even love you saying tonight, like make it into a ritual, have a meal, light a candle, put on some music, write your vows. Um, so yeah, give yourself to the process instead of it just being something to check off a to-do list.
Mhm.
To recognize the ways in which we are defining ourselves.
Mm.
It is very problematic and unhealthy. And it also, a lot of times we prioritize endurance and perseverance in spaces that are unacceptable, right? We're just like, the work is unfulfilling. The coworkers treat me terribly. The supervisor doesn't respect me, but I've been there 7 years. So I'm, it's like, what is the priority? And so if I reclaim my health, if I reclaim my peace, there are going to be some changes I have to make. So because I want to be well, because I want to live well, then I have to be honest about, is this well for me? Is this good for me? Is this destroying me? Right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I tell, when I give this part of it away, when you're in a toxic place, the decision you know, is it you need to plan for your departure. So that may either be looking for another job, or you decide to be an entrepreneur and launch your own thing. Or if you are committed to staying, if they are not changing, then something within you has to change so they don't continue to kill you, right? If I keep waiting for my supervisor to promote me and like that's not going to happen, then I have to stop setting myself up for disappointment or frustration and approach the work differently.
Mm.
Yeah. I did a women's group in South Los Angeles for a number of years. Um, and a woman came in and she was very upset. And she was sharing that on her job, she had been working hard for this promotion. And she was upset she didn't get it. But then what she went on to describe is she, even before not getting it, she didn't like her boss. And so she would never speak to the boss. And she would hate when the boss would kind of come over to her cubicle and say something to her. She would be upset. And she kept to herself, kept her head down, and just tried to work hard. So, one, I want to tell people, you know, most jobs are not a meritocracy, meaning hard work alone is not going to get the promotion. A
Mhm.
big part is relational, right? So she already made it clear she didn't like this lady. She never spoke to this lady. And then she said, when she went, when she found out she didn't get the promotion, she goes to speak with the supervisor and ask, why didn't she get it? And the woman said, you need to work on your emotional intelligence. And the woman says to me, she made this up, meaning like she had never heard the term before, so she didn't know
Right.
it was a real thing, right? And but everything she's describing about how she moves around that workplace lets me know like there's no emotional intel. Like you cannot be hostile toward the person and believe they're going to promote you. It's not going to work, right? So it is important for us to be able to see ourselves, to be aware of ourselves. And this doesn't mean to blame and shame yourself for everything. Like we have to let everything carry its own weight, right? So there are people who are problematic. There are systems and structures that are problematic. Isms and oppression is problematic. And with all of that, I also have to take stock of myself to
Mhm.
say, like, what are my strengths? What are the things I could have done better? What are the things I want to work on? And then how do I express that so that I can get some better outcomes? We also have to think outside of the box. To think of like community-based programming, to think about trainings with lay leaders, and also to think, for me, very critically about prevention, right? Especially as a trauma psychologist, it's not enough to just keep helping people in the aftermath. We want to really be intentional about breaking cycles and preventing as much as we can so that it's not just working for restoration, but we don't want to keep repeating these same patterns. I will also say uh, the needing to greatly diversify the field,
Mhm.
um, that it matters who's in the room. And so at clinics, for example, or even in hospitals, community agencies, counseling centers, there are generally meetings where people, talk about the services they're providing, the clients they're working with, and help each other to come up with some good insights and solutions. And if the client is from a background and no one in the room has a real understanding and respect for that, they can be misguided, they can be misinformed, and then there can be a lot of ruptures because people can feel they're not totally being seen, accepted, celebrated, their culture interwoven or spirituality honored in a way that feels honoring, that feels right. And so I would say also our current insurance system is very problematic. I know many providers stop accepting because it is a lot of paperwork for very minimal reimbursement and compensation. And so I would say structurally, we need to be open to the new, as opposed to like, this is the way it's been done. Like the system is broken and people are falling through the cracks. And so for those who are doing the work, I would encourage developing new interventions, not just thinking that I have to do it the way it's always been done. I'll just give this one example. I had a student who was assigned to do her internship hours at a high school. And she came up with, based on her own interest, and it was a big hit at the school, but it was like a modeling support group. So, like the first half of the 2 hours, they would like practice modeling for like the end of the summer or something, into the school year, they were going to do a fashion show. And in the second hour, they would sit down and it was like a support group. And those kids like signed up for it. People who had been like insecure or isolated were just like strutting and learning how to spin. And then when they would sit down, they would like really open up. So if someone had told me like modeling and therapy, I'm like, like I don't see it, right? So I encourage creativity, innovation, newness, new models and ancient ways, so that we can reach each other. Well, I was taught God is love, but then this terrible thing happened. So, like, how could both things be true? And often in people's faith communities, they're not allowed to ask those questions because doubt or questions are like frowned upon. And so, to be able to, in the therapeutic space, for people to again tell their truth, right? Of like, if it rocked my faith or disrupted my faith. And on the other side, some people, it intensified it. Some people started praying more or reading holy texts more or attending services more, because they like felt they needed to, that was like a rock or a stabilizing force. Another one I mentioned, of course, was music. So some people are perpetually kind of listening to sacred songs as a way of trying to like soothe their nervous system and their souls. And then while some people lost faith, some people intensified faith, for some people it's a change of faith, right? Where they said, well, like the way I had imagined it is not working for me anymore. So I have to either reimagine who God is, reimagine like myself as a living soul. And so like all of those different aspects are an important part of our reclamation. And a beautiful part is when mental health providers and spiritual leaders can work in collaboration, and respect for each other's work, and not making people feel like they have to choose, right? Like some people will say, you don't need a therapist, you need to pray. And then some therapists would say, oh, like, why are you praying? You need, you're to double your sessions. So it's a false choice to make people feel like it's one or the other. We want to be holistic. So we want to not require people, and this is the decolonizing, not have to leave a part of yourself at the door. That when I come into this place for my healing, I need to be fully present with the wholeness of myself.
Have you seen therapists and spiritual care providers work together? Have you seen that work?
Yes. So interestingly, a number of churches have opened their own counseling centers, and that they can be run in different ways. Sometimes it is they just allow them to use the space, but because it's on their property, members of that faith community feel more comfortable going because but the people providing it are confidential, are licensed mental health professionals, but it's just like affiliated with the faith community. Another one is where they more do trainings, what they would call like lay people. So it's members of the church, perhaps, who have gone through a training in order to teach like stress management, or coping with grief or that kind of thing. I recommend that every faith community have a referral list, right? Because sometimes people are coming in and they would, like an encouraging scripture or a prayer. But some people are coming in really needing additional support. And so to be able to make the referral of a places in the community that are no cost or sliding scale or low cost, who are respectful when we think about like culture or faith.
Mhm.
Um, so that those are some of the ways I've seen it work. A lot of churches, or I keep saying churches, but I want to say, synagogues, temples, even spiritual centers, a lot of them have like health fairs. And I always encourage to not just focus on physical health, but also to have booths on mental health,
Yes.
because that's an important part.
Hmm. Yeah, and reducing the stigma of that
Yes,
care is the
that's
first
right.
barrier that needs to be removed. So just integrating it that way really normalizes it as part of a holistic health. Um,
Yes.
so thank you for that question. The next one is,
You feel that outrage, and the key becomes Judith Herman, who wrote the book Trauma and Recovery, talks about the difference between constructive anger and destructive anger, right? So if I'm in such a rage that I'm immobilized and making myself sick, then of course that's going to work against me in anything that I want to do. But on the other side, like a constructive outrage, that has been the fuel for any major change that's happened in human history. Is people were outraged enough to say this cannot be, right? This is unacceptable. And so, connecting with like-minded people, working in community and collaboration to do what we can, where we can, with what we can. Um, and I would say training our eyes to see the small steps, because sometimes we can be in such a place of despair, that when we can't see any movement, that can put people in a deep, deep depression and hopelessness. And so, like, I see the despair, I am outraged by it, and then I do what I can to shift things, right? I do what I can to try to be a part of the solution with uncompensated labor as a student, especially. So get what you need to get, and whatever it may be lacking in your program. Come to trainings like this, outside resources and spaces to nourish yourself and feed yourself, develop community. And I'm going to say both in your department and outside of your department. So you need to connect with local community, and let me backtrack on need, right? Because I'm not the boss of you. You may find it helpful to connect with local community, but you can choose that if you so choose. And I will say not to isolate yourself among your peers. Even if you are the only one or one of few who are Black women, there are people, both faculty and classmates, um, who can be in solidarity with you. So listen when people speak so you can try to hear their heart, to know that there may be people in that place who are for you, and you want to foster and cultivate those relationships, protect those, because they will help you both personally and academically and
Mhm.
professionally. And you're deserving of that. And the last thing I will say is, as Black women, often we have been taught by family, by society, and eventually by ourselves to erase ourselves in service of others,
Mhm.
and to know you don't have to always be the strong one, that you need and deserve places where you can unfold, where you can collapse, where you can be real, where you can be tender, where you can be human and heartful ness of what you're sharing. And it reminds me of a question and exchange I had with a client when I was talking about us, you know, coming to see our beauty, right, within ourselves. And she asked a very targeted question, which I think is important. She said, Dr. Thema, what does it matter if I think I'm beautiful if no one else does, right? It's not just like, oh, you have body image issues and why don't you just love yourself? As you're describing the pain of not just strangers, but people in your family, people who would say they love you, saying and looking at you in ways that are very hurtful and painful. So I want to name that there is not a magic bullet for like, oh, their opinions just don't count. But what I would say, as you are healing your sense of self and redefining your sense of self and beauty, it is going to be important to develop and choose an inner circle of people who really see you, right? Because we didn't get to choose our family, right? That's they are who they are, and they think based on their conditioning, um, and that's how it's coming out. So you can set some limits or boundaries because if every time you're in their presence, it's breaking your spirit, then you want to think about uh, how much time or what kind of time and do I want to give them? And is there any variation? Like, are they all on this same theme? Or it's like two mean aunts, right? And like everybody else is quiet. Because it is important to distinguish sometimes the loudest people become the voice of the family, and maybe not everybody's in agreement. So you want to determine, are there people who feel more safe or supportive in this family that I have? And then in terms of my chosen family or chosen friends, choosing people with whom I feel better about myself and with whom I feel nourished, with whom I feel celebrated. And then I would also say it makes a difference, your medical team. Uh, do I have a physician who is focused on my health and wellness, not just in terms of what the scale says, but my holistic health and wellness, right? Because they're in a position of authority. And when they have that understanding, it helps you to feel supported and affirmed in your desire to be healthy, recognizing that like how that is defined is very different, can be very different than how my family is looking at it. And the last thing I'll say is Eve Ensler, who wrote the Vagina Monologues, she talks about it's a radical revolutionary act for a woman in this country to look in the mirror and say, I love myself. And she said, most of us, when we're looking, we don't fully believe it, but we continue to repeat it. And as you repeat it, you can grow into it. You can uh, learn to embrace the fullness of your full body self. And the last thing I will say is sometimes you need a change of environment because there are places where how you look right now is quite celebrated. And so sometimes you need to be in a different environment where people really see uh, the beauty and the glory of who you are. I love sacred dance. And also because since I teach and facilitate therapy, I spend a lot of times being still, like sitting in this chair or standing in front of a class. And so reclaiming my body in dance and movement is very liberating for me. And the second one that I will mention is my sacred practice in the morning. And so I encourage people to develop a ritual of whatever you would like to do to nourish yourself before you go out in the day so that we are not so fragile or empty, but that I show up with my cup full and then I can work or do or interact from my overflow. So I'm not showing up like on my last nerve. Like you've heard people say, are you getting on my last nerve? So no. I want, my nervous system to be fully nourished. And so I do that for me, whether that's with music or with prayer or in community or in walking in nature, whatever, writing poetry, uh, have a morning ritual that feeds you so that you're not going into the world empty.
Mhm. That's wisdom. Thank
Mm.
you for that question. And I think that is our last question. I'm going to give you the final word. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that we haven't asked you about or that's arising in your heart?
Yes, I want to say that reclaiming yourself is a journey with detours and imperfections. And so, not to judge yourself harshly, to give yourself grace and compassion. Sometimes, when people see persons like me or you, they can assume like we always get it right, right? Or always have the answers or have always like lined everything up just so. And that is far from the truth.
Mm.
Uh, that, it's a growing process, and I pull the wisdom out of my wounds and keep letting myself evolve and grow. And so when you stumble, don't quit. When you stumble, give yourself a breather and then continue on your journey. You're worth the journey.